Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy original science fiction exploring humanity's place among the stars, please subscribe and join us for this story now. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Beginner Instructor Jhavren Doss placed the human in beginner survival because the human belonged in beginner survival. This fact would later be debated extensively. Jhavren maintained that the original decision had been correct. The problem was not the placement. Problem was discovering what humans apparently considered a beginner. Cadet Caleb Winters arrived at Averin Interstellar Defense Academy on the 9th day of the autumn training cycle. Human, 22 years old, aerospace systems specialization, exchange cadet from Earth, no advanced military field qualification, no planetary exploration credential, no rescue service qualification, no wilderness profession, no medical certification beyond basic civilian emergency care. Entirely ordinary. Jhavren liked ordinary cadets. Ordinary cadets followed predictable educational paths. They arrived knowing little. Instructors taught them things. Then examinations established that the things had been learned. It was one of civilization's better systems. Jhavren was Alkari. His species had evolved on a geologically stable world whose climate varied so little across inhabited regions that ancient Alkari languages once used the same word for weather and background. Alkari bodies were tall and narrow with two primary arms and a smaller precision arm centered beneath the chest. Smooth ivory-gray skin covered them. Two narrow sensory crests swept backward from the skull and rose involuntarily under stress. Alkari civilization had learned early that complexity became manageable when expertise was organized. A damaged reactor belonged to engineers. A medical emergency belonged to physicians. Navigation belonged to navigators. Atmospheric maintenance belonged to atmospheric technicians. An ordinary citizen was not expected to become mediocre at everything. An ordinary citizen learned how to identify the correct specialist. Jhavren considered this sensible. Humans, he would learn, had philosophical objections to being sensible in only one direction. He sat across from Caleb during placement evaluation. The human wore academy gray, short brown hair, average build, no unusual scars, no enhanced musculature, no visible implants beyond a standard translator node. Jhavren opened the record, advanced environmental survival certification. No, sir, military field medicine qualification. No, independent wilderness navigation credential. No, planetary search and rescue license. No, hostile biome expedition experience. Caleb thought, does camping count? Jhavren's left sensory crest rose. No, then no, extended wilderness isolation, like deliberately. Yes, no, cold weather field qualification, no, desert qualification, no, open water survival, not officially. Jhavren looked up. What does that mean? I can swim, that is not what I asked. I know. Jhavren returned to the record. Humans frequently complicated answers to questions they had already understood. It seemed cultural, formal fire management training. Caleb hesitated. Probably not the kind you mean. That answer is unacceptable. Then no. Jhavren selected the placement. Survival Fundamentals Level 1. Caleb leaned slightly to read it. Sounds good. You do not object. Why would I? Some exchange cadets consider introductory placement insulting. Caleb shrugged. If I don't know your procedures, beginner makes sense. That was an excellent answer. Jhavren liked him immediately. This feeling lasted until the first fire lesson. Survival fundamentals began with combustion because 17 conquered species attending Averin came from cultures where uncontrolled fire was either rare, environmentally impossible, or professionally restricted. Jhavren stood before 12 cadets in an outdoor training site. A small fuel pile waited inside a containment ring. Fire requires 3 components. A display appeared. Oxidizer, one side of the triangle, fuel. Another, heat sufficient to initiate sustained combustion. The third. Caleb's expression changed, not boredom. Confusion, Jhavren noticed. Cadet Winters, yes, sir, you have a question. No, you appear confused. I was just trying to figure out if the triangle was different here. Jhavren stared. What triangle? The fire triangle. Silence. Jhavren's sensory crests rose 1 degree. You know this concept? Yeah, from where? Caleb considered. School, probably. Jhavren continued the lesson. Fire location, fuel selection, ventilation, wind hazards, suppression, preventing ground ignition. Maintaining a controllable flame rather than maximizing heat output. When practical testing began, several cadets struggled. That was normal. Cadet Pexalur built a fire too efficiently. The Darathi came from a desert world where heat management was an instinctive cultural concern, but open combustion was uncommon. Her first flame consumed its tinder too quickly and collapsed. Beaumolatry, a massive blue-black Unith cadet, arranged his fuel according to engineering diagrams, and produced a structurally perfect pile that refused to ignite. Caleb crouched beside his materials, checked the wind, cleared dry debris farther from the containment ring, placed suppression sand and water within reach, built a small tinder structure, ignited it, added fuel gradually. The fire stabilized, not impressive, not large, correct. Jhavren approached. You have done this before. Yes. You stated you possess no fire management qualification. I don't. Jhavren pointed. You cleared the surroundings before ignition. Yeah, you considered wind. Yeah, you prepared suppression material. Seems smart. You selected progressively larger fuel. Caleb looked at the fire. That's how you make one. Jhavren's sensory crests rose farther. Where were you trained? Caleb stared at him. Camping. Jhavren waited. The translator offered no alternative meaning. With what organization? My family. What military unit? Caleb blinked. My parents. Pexelur turned from her dead fire. Bommel also looked over. Jhavren said, your parents taught you controlled fire construction. Yeah, why? Caleb looked at the fire again. Because we were camping. Jhavren disliked circular explanations. Why were you constructing fires while camping? Caleb thought, for cooking. A pause, heat, another marshmallows. Jhavren had no idea what the last word meant and refused to ask. Were you a child? Oh, yeah. How old? First time, I don't know, 7, 8. Pex's silver eyes widened. Jhavren stared at the human. You were permitted to handle open flame at 8 years old, with adults there. That qualification does not improve the statement as much as you believe. Caleb smiled. I didn't get to pour fuel on it or anything. Jhavren's precision arm tightened against his torso. There was liquid accelerant available, not for me. Wonderful. The human's fire burned steadily. Bommel's collapsed. Pexa S. died. Jhavren looked at the human, then at his placement record. No survival certification, no fire management qualification, no relevant professional training. Beginner. The designation remained correct. Jhavren told himself this several times. It became less convincing over the next week. Chapter 2. Apparently children do this. The shelter lesson was worse. Jhavren led the class into a woodland training sector and assigned a simple problem. You have 6 hours before temperatures fall below your species' preferred tolerance. Construct emergency shelter using available material and issued equipment. The cadets dispersed. Caleb did not start building. Good. Beginning construction without site selection was a common beginner error. He walked, checked the terrain, looked upward, tested the soil, examining the slope. Jhavren followed. What are you evaluating? Drainage. Good. And wind. Good. Caleb pointed upward. Also that. Jhavren looked. Dead branch hung from a large tree. What about it? I don't want to sleep under it. Why? Because it's dead. Jhavren waited. Caleb looked at him. Jhavren looked at the branch. The human sighed. It could fall. That probability is small. Still don't want it landing on my head. He moved 20 meters away, then checked the ground again. Jhavren's crests rose. Previous shelter training. Caleb gave him the expression Jhavren was beginning to hate. Camping. The water lesson followed 2 days later. Each cadet received a container of untreated water drawn from a controlled training reservoir. Jhavren explained biological contamination. Caleb immediately opened the purification kit. You have used this equipment, not this one. Then why are you opening it before instruction? I figured we're not supposed to drink pond water. How do you know? The human looked genuinely concerned. Because it's pond water. Jhavren's crests rose. Explain. Animals poop in it. Bommel made a choking sound. Pexa turned away. Jhavren said, your explanation lacks technical precision. Still true. Jhavren taught filtration, chemical treatment, boiling, species-specific pathogen risk. Caleb already understood the general concept, but listened carefully when alien biology changed the rules. That distinction mattered. He did not assume Earth procedures transferred universally. When Jhavren explained that one local microorganism produced heat-stable toxins, Caleb stopped. So boiling isn't enough for that one. Correct. Good to know. Jhavren's crests lowered slightly. Finally, something new. Then came emergency medicine. Medical instructor Kioran Teth entered the classroom carrying a training limb and the calm expression of a professional who expected mistakes. Kioran belonged to the Melkai. Compact body, 4 narrow arms, a crown of short sensory feathers surrounding her head. She placed the simulated injured limb on a table. Severe external hemorrhage. A red fluid began pumping from the artificial wound. What is your first priority? Caleb answered without thinking, stop the bleeding. Kioran looked at him. Method, direct pressure first depending on the wound. Continue, pressure dressing, pack if appropriate. Tourniquet if it's life-threatening, extremity bleeding and pressure isn't controlling it or we can't maintain pressure. Kioran's feathers lifted. Jhavren slowly turned toward the human. Kioran asked, where did you receive combat medical training? I didn't. You just described hemorrhage control priorities. Basic first aid, military. No, emergency profession. No, then where? Community course. Kioran stared. Caleb added and videos. Kioran's feathers rose higher. You learned potentially life-saving hemorrhage control from publicly available recordings. Some of it. Were you certified? Basic first aid years ago. Nothing advanced. Jhavren approached. Very well, her expression changed. Jhavren recognized an instructor who had just decided to attack. She changed the simulation. Internal abdominal trauma. What is the injury? Caleb stared. No idea. Jhavren paused. Diagnosis. I just said no idea. Treatment. Call somebody like you. Jhavren's feathers lowered. Anything before I arrive. Keep them from moving around unless there's a reason. Watch breathing. Treat for shock if appropriate. Don't give them random drugs. Don't pretend I know what's happening inside them. Jhavren looked toward Jhavren. Interesting. She changed the simulation again. Alien respiratory distress. What medication? Caleb shook his head. No clue. Why? I don't know. Melkai medicine. Correct. She changed again. Simple laceration. Caleb answered. Fracture. He knew basic immobilization, neurological symptoms. He knew they were serious, but not what they meant. Cardiac arrest. He immediately asked. Human or alien? Jhavren stopped. Jhavren's crests twitched. Caleb pointed toward the simulation. Because I know human CPR, I am not guessing where an alien heart is. Jhavren's feathers flattened. For the first time, she looked pleased. You know enough medicine to understand when you need a medic. Caleb shrugged. That's kind of the point. Jhavren turned toward Jhavren. Why is he in level 1? Jhavren's sensory crests rose. He has no formal survival qualifications. Jhavren looked at Caleb, then back. That answer is becoming less useful. The Academy fire evacuation lecture broke something in Jhavren. He presented a standard residential smoke scenario. Caleb already knew. Leave immediately, use the closest safe exit, avoid re-entering, stay low if smoke conditions require. Do not waste time recovering possessions, meet at a predetermined location, contact emergency services. Jhavren stopped the simulation. Where? Caleb blinked. Where what? Where did you learn structural fire evacuation? School. Jhavren's precision arm tightened. What educational level? Elementary. How old? Caleb thought. 6, maybe 5 when we started drills. The room became silent. Pexa turned. Your school intentionally exposed juveniles to simulated fires. No, Caleb frowned. Fire drills. What is the distinction? They don't actually light the school on fire. Bommel rumbled, reassuring. Caleb continued. Alarm goes off. Everyone lines up. Teachers take you outside. You practice where to go. Jhavren stared for military preparation. No, emergency services? No, then why? Caleb looked confused, so kids know what to do if there's a fire. Jhavren stared longer. Caleb shifted. What? Jhavren ended class 12 minutes early. Then he spent the evening researching human childhood. This was a mistake. He discovered fire drills, earthquake drills, tornado drills, swim lessons, bicycle safety, roadside emergency kits, first aid classes, emergency telephone numbers memorized by young children, camping organizations, youth outdoor programs, weather warnings, water safety, household tool use, cooking, sports medicine, storm shelters, lost child procedures, school evacuation. He found a human instructional recording teaching children what to do if their clothing caught fire. Jhavren watched it twice. A human child demonstrated stop, drop, roll. Jhavren paused the recording. The child appeared approximately 6 years old. He opened a new document, Human Juvenile Emergency Competence Cultural Review. He typed, working hypothesis, humans rehearse catastrophe recreationally. He stared at the sentence, deleted recreationally, typed, preventatively. That was somehow worse. Chapter 3. Humans practice bad days. Jhavren confronted Caleb the next morning. The human was eating breakfast. That felt appropriate. Humans seemed most honest while eating. Jhavren sat across from him. Explain fire drills. Caleb looked up. We did that yesterday. Explain why in case there's a fire. That answer remains circular. Caleb put down his utensil. Okay, Jhavren activated a list. Fire evacuation. Yeah, severe weather drills, depending where you live. Earthquake drills. Same. Swimming instruction for juveniles. Pretty common. Basic first aid. Sometimes outdoor navigation. Depends. Camping. Caleb smiled. You really hate camping now. I regard it with professional suspicion. Pexa sat down beside them. Bommel followed with a tray large enough to feed several humans. They had apparently decided this was entertainment. Jhavren ignored them. Why does human civilization distribute fragments of emergency training among juveniles rather than reserving those skills for professionals? Caleb thought, because professionals aren't always there. That cannot justify teaching every skill. We don't. Your records suggest broad exposure. Some people get broad exposure. How broad? Depends where you grow up. Family, school, money, culture, interests. That was an important qualification. Jhavren had already suspected the archive exaggerated consistency. Humans were never consistent at planetary scale. Caleb continued. Some people can't swim, some have never camped, some couldn't read a topographic map if you threatened them. Pexa said you can, badly. You outperformed half the class, that says something about the class. Pexa's silver eyes narrowed. Caleb immediately corrected, not in a mean way, too late. Jhavren raised his precision hand. Continue. Caleb shrugged. A lot of us learn bits. Why? Because stuff happens. What stuff? Storms. He counted on his fingers. Power goes out, somebody cuts themselves, car breaks down, kid gets lost, kitchen catches fire, you go hiking, and weather changes. Baumel said, you describe an unsafe civilization. Caleb smiled. Earth is fun. Jhavren did not believe those words belonged together. He leaned forward. I found human youth organizations in which children voluntarily sleep outdoors. Yeah, without permanent structures, that's camping. In weather, yes, on the ground, usually with pads. Insects are present, vary, predators, depends where, temperature fluctuations, definitely. Why? Caleb laughed. Because it's fun. Jhavren stared. The human saw his expression. Okay, also because you learn things, such as starting a fire. Jhavren's crests rose, of course, cooking, outside, yes. Why? Because the kitchen isn't there. Jhavren closed his eyes. Pexa made a small clicking laugh. Caleb continued. You learn how cold feels before you're in real trouble. Learn that wet clothes suck. Learn to pack things. Learn to fix small problems. Jhavren opened his eyes, controlled discomfort. Caleb shrugged. Sometimes humans intentionally permit juveniles to experience environmental discomfort. Not dangerous levels if adults are doing it right. For education and fun. Stop saying fun. Caleb grinned. Jhavren looked toward Pexa. Darathi children receive desert survival education, some cultural instruction. At what age? Basic heat avoidance begins young. Fire? No. Medical response? Professionals. Jhavren looked toward Baumel. Unith. Water safety is instinctive and family taught. Equipment improvisation is discouraged. Why? Baumel's broad face tightened. Because an improvised pressure seal may fail. Caleb nodded. Reasonable. Baumel looked surprised. You improvise constantly, only when the proper thing isn't available. That is when improper things become most dangerous, also when you might need one. Baumel considered. Jhavren looked back at Caleb. You expose children to small failures. The human's smile faded slightly. Sometimes, yeah. Why? Caleb leaned back. He thought longer this time, because you don't want somebody's first bad day to be the first time they felt any of it. Jhavren became still. Caleb continued. If you've been cold before, cold isn't automatically panic. He pointed toward the table. If you've practiced leaving a building when the alarm goes off, you already know where your feet are supposed to go. Another, if you've cleaned a cut before, blood doesn't necessarily mean your brain shuts off. Pexa watched him. Caleb shrugged. You don't wait for somebody's first bad day to teach them what bad feels like. The cafeteria noise seemed to recede around Jhavren. That was the distinction he had been missing. Human children were not trained to master disaster. Many were simply allowed to meet small, controlled pieces of it before the real version arrived. Cold, smoke alarms, scraped knees, deep water with an instructor close enough to grab them. Familiarity was not expertise, but panic had less room to pretend everything was new. Jhavren said this produces dangerous overconfidence. Caleb answered immediately. That pleased him. You agree? Sure, a little first aid can make someone believe they are a medic. Yep, a little outdoor experience may encourage poor judgment. Absolutely. A poorly trained person may improvise when they should wait. Yeah, Jhavren's crests lowered, so your system is flawed. Caleb smiled. Everything's flawed. That is an intellectually lazy defense. Wasn't defending it. Jhavren stopped. Caleb took another bite. I'm just saying basic competence and expertise aren't the same thing. You repeatedly describe yourself as possessing basic competence. Because I do. You have demonstrated proficiency across 9 emergency categories. Basic proficiency. Pexa turned toward him. That word bothers me. Caleb smiled. My aunt would laugh if you called me a survival expert. Jhavren asked, your aunt is a survival specialist. Accountant. Silence. Baumel's huge body began shaking. Pexa stared, then laughed. Jhavren did not externally. Why would an accountant laugh? She does way more wilderness stuff than I do. Of course she does. Runs ultramarathons, too. Jhavren stared. I do not know what that is. Don't look it up. Jhavren looked it up immediately. He regretted it. Chapter 4. The human is not the best student. Jhavren's concern about Caleb Winters decreased during the first full field exercise. This was because the human made mistakes. Jhavren found mistakes comforting. 24 cadets were divided into teams and deployed across a controlled wilderness range for 30 hours. Mixed forest, rock slopes, cold river valleys, and minimal equipment. Objective, reach extraction point 3 by 1400 the following day. Caleb's team included Pexa, Baumel, and 2 other cadets with specialist strengths. Pexa carried the navigation package. That was appropriate. She had the best terrain memory scores in the class. Caleb suggested a route during the first hour. Pexa rejected it. You are reading contour intervals incorrectly. Caleb looked. No, I'm not. You are? She pointed. This is a ridge. I know. This line is not a trail. Caleb leaned closer. Oh, Pexa waited. Caleb folded the map. Yep, you're right. That was all. No argument, no embarrassment, no attempt to reclaim authority. Pex's silver eyes narrowed. You concede, I was wrong, you thought you were correct. That's usually how being wrong works. Jhavren monitored remotely, his sensory crests lowered. Good. 3 hours later, Caleb almost touched a local broadleaf plant while clearing space for camp. Bommel stopped him. Do not. Caleb froze. Why? Irritant oil. Caleb pulled his hand back. Good catch. You did not identify it. No. You have survival training. I have Earth survival training. Bommel looked at the plant. That distinction seems important. Very. Jhavren approved. That evening, another cadet with superior low-light vision took the night orientation role. Pexa chose the route. Bommel moved heavy materials. Caleb handled fire and helped organize shelter. He was not the best at any major task. That should have made him unremarkable. Instead, Jhavren noticed something. Caleb kept asking questions, not technical questions, social ones. Who's cold? Who hasn't eaten? Who can see best after dark? Bommel, can you move that without hurting yourself? Pexa, how confident are you on this route? Who remembers where the emergency marker was? When the team debated crossing a shallow stream before dark, Caleb asked, who here knows water better than I do? Bommel raised one enormous hand. Me. Great, your call. Bommel tested the flow, rejected the crossing. They walked another kilometer to a safer section. Pexa eventually asked, why do you continually ask what everyone else can do? Caleb looked confused, because I can't do everything. You have attempted nearly every task. Attempted isn't the same as being best at it. Pexa's eyes narrowed. You are comfortable depending upon others. Caleb laughed. That's why you bring people. Pexa looked toward the rest of the team. That is not survival doctrine. It is where I'm from. Humans train for group survival. Humans mostly evolved doing things in groups. Pexa said many species are social. Sure, Caleb adjusted his pack. But a lot of our survival stories pretend it's one person alone because that sounds cool. In reality, if you're stranded with 6 people and decide to act like you're alone, you're an idiot. Jhavren replayed the sentence later, not because of the insult, because Caleb's survival instincts seemed distributed. He did not ask, what can I do? He asked, what can we do? At dawn, Pexa found a more efficient route through a rock basin. Caleb carried part of another cadet's equipment after a knee strain. Bommel found safe water. Another cadet identified edible local vegetation. Caleb prepared none of the food himself. They reached the extraction point 11 minutes early. 3rd place. Pexa looked offended. 3rd. Caleb sat on his pack. Pretty good. 2 teams were faster, then they were better. You do not find that unacceptable? Not really. Pexa looked toward Jhavren. Is this a human defect? Jhavren said several. Caleb pointed. See, teamwork. Jhavren's crests twitched. He had learned something valuable. The human was not exceptional. That was comforting. Then the shuttle crashed. Chapter 5. The shuttle. Technically, it did not crash. The pilot insisted on this distinction later. Jhavren considered it professionally defensive. Training shuttle suffered a propulsion control fault during descent into the Academy's northern alpine range. The fault began as a sensor disagreement, then became a thrust vectoring problem. Then, because disasters enjoy promotion, became an emergency landing. Jhavren sat near the forward cabin. Kioran Teth sat opposite him. 12 cadets occupied the rear, Caleb, Pexa, and Bommel among them. The first warning sounded. The pilot spoke over intercom, remain restrained. Caleb looked up. That was all, no panic. The shuttle banked too sharply. Jhavren's sensory crests rose. Kioran looked toward the cockpit. What is it? Control issue. The deck vibrated. The pilot's voice came again. Brace. Now everyone moved. Training hands, harnesses, heads protected according to species-specific posture. The shuttle struck snow, bounced, hit again. Something tore away outside. Then the world became noise. Metal, white, impact. Jhavren's shoulder hit his restraint. Pain flashed. The shuttle rotated, stopped. Silence lasted less than 1 second, then alarms, smoke, a cadet screaming. Jhavren released his harness. Pain stabbed through his left side. He stood anyway. Remain calm. That was an excellent instruction. Nobody followed it. Kioran was already moving. The shuttle tilted approximately 7 degrees. One side window showed snow, the other showed rock. A panel sparked near the rear. Caleb shouted, fuel. The pilot answered from the forward hatch. Reactor safe. Chemical maneuvering line damaged. Leaking. External. Caleb was out of his harness. Jhavren turned. Cadet remain. Everyone here. What? Head count. Pexa was already counting. 12 cadets, both instructors, present, pilot. Here, Caleb looked toward the screaming cadet, who's bleeding. Kioran reached them. 1 injury significant. Jhavren took a step. His left leg failed. He hit the seat. Caleb turned. You okay? I am the instructor. Didn't ask. Jhavren's crests rose in anger. Then pain arrived harder. Kioran looked over. Sit. I am capable. Sit. In the matter of whether Jhavren was allowed to stand, medical specialization outranked survival instruction. Apparently this was one of those times. Jhavren sat. Kioran examined him. Possible lower leg fracture. I can walk. You just demonstrated otherwise. The shuttle lights died. Darkness, then red emergency strips came on. Caleb looked toward the ceiling. Heat. The pilot checked, primary heating loop ruptured. Outside temperature, minus 23 degrees Celsius, worse overnight. Several species aboard tolerated cold poorly, Alkari among them. Jhavren felt his crests flat. The communications officer panel showed fault. The pilot tried emergency transmission, static. Main antenna is gone. Beacon, Jhavren asked, intermittent. Caleb looked around the shuttle. Can we stay inside? Jhavren stared. That was the correct question. The hull appeared intact except for the damaged rear service area. Likely any fire. None. They're stable. Then staying inside beats going outside. Pexa looked toward him. Obviously. Caleb shook his head. Not obvious after a wreck. Sometimes the vehicle is the thing trying to kill you. Jhavren watched. Caleb had not asked for command, had not announced a plan. He was simply reducing uncertainty. Who is here? Who is injured? Is there fuel? Is there fire? Can we remain sheltered? How much heat? Jhavren had taught entire lectures on emergency prioritization. Yet the human was doing it without naming the doctrine. Kioran splinted Jhavren's leg. Another cadet had a deep arm wound. She controlled the bleeding. Caleb assisted only when asked. Good, no pretending. Bommel moved damaged seating away from the rear hatch. Pexa checked external terrain through the windows. The pilot tried the beacon again. Nothing. Jhavren's body temperature was already beginning to fall. He looked at Caleb. The human had gone still. Thinking, Jhavren asked, "What are you doing?" Caleb looked toward him, figuring out what kills us first. Silence. Jhavren felt something cold that had nothing to do with the damaged heater. That was the question, not what is the survival protocol, not what advanced method applies. What kills us first? Caleb looked toward the injured cadet. Bleeding's controlled. Kioran nodded. Currently, fire, none there. The pilot answered. Stable. Then cold. Jhavren stared. Caleb pointed toward the damaged heating panel. Cold kills us next. The beginner had identified the curriculum. Chapter 6, Beginner Skills. The first hour involved nothing advanced. That was what unsettled Jhavren. Caleb Winters did not produce a miraculous device. He did not repair the shuttle reactor. He did not trek alone through a blizzard. He did not discover some secret human metabolic reserve that rendered cold irrelevant. He put on another layer, then made everyone else do the same. Inventory insulation. Bommel looked at him. Why? Because we have it. Emergency blankets, seat padding, spare thermal liners, cargo wraps, cold weather training gear intended for the exercise. Caleb did not care whether something had been designed as a blanket. He cared whether it trapped heat. Bommel did. This cargo insulation is not rated for personal use. Is it toxic? No. Sharp? No. Conductive? No. Then right now it's a blanket. Bommel stared. That is not its function. It is tonight. Jhavren almost objected, then stopped. Function, not designation. Bommel reluctantly helped remove safe sections. They layered them beneath cold, sensitive cadets' first ground insulation. Jhavren recognized the principle. Caleb practiced it during shelter training. He simply applied it inside the shuttle. Kioran monitored injuries. Pexa and two others checked storage, food, water, emergency batteries, signal flares, portable lamps. The pilot attempted another transmission 5 minutes later. Caleb raised a hand. Battery reserve. 41%. How much does transmission use? The pilot checked. Significant. Then don't transmit every 5 minutes. Jhavren said the beacon may establish contact. Caleb looked toward him. Does rescue know our flight path? Yes. Do they know we had a control failure? The shuttle transmitted the initial fault. Then they're already looking. Jhavren's crest shifted. Probably. Save battery for scheduled attempts. The pilot considered, then nodded. 10-minute windows every half hour. Caleb said, your call. Again, no need to win, just solve. A cadet near the rear began shivering violently. Kioran moved, core temperature falling. Caleb looked at the clothing, wet. The cadet's lower garments had been soaked when snow entered through the damaged service panel. Kioran nodded. Remove wet layers. Bommel stared. In this temperature, wet is worse, Caleb said. They created a privacy barrier. Replace wet garments with dry emergency layers. Added insulation. Warm packs went to the torso. Kioran adjusted them for species-specific heat tolerance. Caleb asked before placing anything. Jhavren noticed. He knew the concept, not the alien physiology. Kioran did. Team, another cadet asked, should we distribute food? Caleb looked at the supply count. How long until rescue? Jhavren said unknown, then no feast. Pexa's silver eyes narrowed. We need metabolic energy. Yes. Caleb picked up one ration, so we plan it. Water inventory, food inventory, species requirements, not equal distribution, appropriate distribution. Bommel required more water but tolerated cold better. Alkari required more thermal protection. One small species required frequent caloric intake. Caleb accepted every adjustment. No human default assumptions. The damaged rear door seal began leaking snow. A proper replacement was stored in an external maintenance bay that nobody wanted to access during worsening weather. Bommel examined the gap. Seal mechanism is distorted. Caleb crouched. Can we close it farther? No. Can we block airflow? Baumel considered, not with approved material. Caleb looked around. Seat liner. Baumel's eyes widened. That is not pressure rated. We're not sealing vacuum. Still improper. Will it stop wind? Baumel looked at the gap, then the liner. Yes. Great. Baumel frowned. No. Caleb waited. Baumel examined it again. It will tear unless supported. Okay. Baumel's expression changed. He pulled a rigid panel from a damaged storage compartment. This behind it. Caleb smiled. There you go. Baumel stared. I have violated 3 equipment standards. You'll survive. That statement is currently the objective. Together they created an ugly windbreak. It worked. Jhavren watched Baumel inspect it repeatedly. You disapprove, he said. Baumel looked miserable. Profoundly, yet it works. Jhavren understood the youth's concern. Improvisation could become reckless very quickly, but Caleb's improvisation was not random. He kept asking what function mattered, not what can this object be forced to do. But what problem are we solving? Reduce wind, retain heat, preserve battery, stop bleeding. The actions were almost embarrassingly basic. Hour 3. The temperature inside the shuttle stabilized above immediate lethal range. Not comfortable, safe enough. The bleeding cadet remained stable. Jhavren's fractured leg throbbed. Kioran had immobilized it. The beacon had not connected. Snow intensified outside. Caleb sat beside the makeshift insulation wall and checked a written inventory. Jhavren said, you are not employing advanced survival doctrine. Caleb looked up. No, why? The human stared at him as though the answer was obvious. We're cold and somebody's bleeding. He tightened a wrap around one insulation bundle. Advanced can wait. Jhavren looked around. Fire none, bleeding controlled, exposure managed, shelter existing, water inventoried, communication conserved. Every beginner lesson one after another. The academy called them fundamentals because they came first. Somewhere along the way, Jhavren realized the academy had begun using beginner as a synonym for unimportant. That had been the mistake. The shuttle creaked. Baumel looked toward the floor. His massive body went still. Then he lowered one hand. Jhavren noticed. What? Baumel did not answer. He placed both palms against the floor. His eyes narrowed. Movement. Caleb stopped. What kind? Below us. Pexa looked toward the snow outside. That is impossible. Baumel kept listening through his limbs. No. His voice lowered water. Jhavren's sensory crests rose. They were not finished. Disasters rarely respect completed lessons. Chapter 7. I don't know. The shuttle had landed on ice. Not a lake, not exactly. The alpine shelf beneath them contained deep seasonal melt channels running under accumulated snow and glacial crust. The academy knew this. Jhavren knew this. He had simply believed they were 6 kilometers east of the unstable zone. The damaged navigation system disagreed with itself. Pexa crawled toward the surviving side window. Terrain map. The pilot displayed the last reliable position. Pexa stared. No, Jhavren looked toward her. What? We drifted farther west during descent. How far? Possibly 4 kilometers. Caleb looked between them, meaning Pexa pointed through the window toward the slope. Subsurface channels. Baumel kept one hand against the floor. Water movement has increased. Caleb looked downward, then at Jhavren. What does that mean? Jhavren answered, the ice supporting us may be structurally weakened. Caleb waited. How long? I don't know. The human immediately turned to Pexa. She thought, I need external markers. Can you tell if we're in danger right now? Not confidently. Baumel said the vibration is changing. Caleb looked at him. Bad? I do not know. Caleb stood, then stopped. Jhavren watched him confront a problem for which childhood had apparently provided no recreational drill. The human said, okay, nothing else. Pexa stared. Caleb looked at Jhavren. I don't know this. Jhavren's crest shifted. No, you do, partly. Pexa, she nodded, more than him on local terrain. Caleb pointed toward her. Then your lead. Pexa froze. You have been organizing the emergency. So, you are surrendering your recommendation. I don't have one. You suggested remaining inside before we found out the floor might disappear. Pexa stared. Caleb's voice sharpened. I'm guessing now. Silence then. You are. Pexa looked toward the terrain display. Something changed in her posture. Confidence. Not total enough. We need to inspect the western edge. The pilot objected. Storm. Without visual terrain confirmation, I cannot determine shelf integrity. Kioran said minimal personnel. Pexa nodded. Me and Baumel. Caleb said, why Baumel? He can feel movement through the ice. Good. Baumel stood. I am also least cold sensitive. Better. Jhavren watched Caleb. You are not going. No, that surprised him. Why? Caleb looked at Pexa. She knows terrain. Then Baumel. He knows what the ice is doing. Then himself. I'd mostly be another person who can fall through. Pexa's silver eyes widened slightly. Jhavren felt something important settle. Caleb did not confuse participation with usefulness. The 2 aliens prepared. Tether thermal gear emergency marker radio. Pexa and Baumel exited. Snow swallowed them almost immediately. The shuttle waited 10 minutes 15-20. Caleb paced once, stopped himself. 23 minutes later, Pexa transmitted, we must move. Jhavren's crests rose. How severe? The shelf edge has fractured 30 meters down slope. Bommel spoke behind her, vibration increasing. Pexa continued, current shuttle position may remain stable for hours. A pause or not? Caleb looked toward Jhavren. Jhavren considered. The shuttle was their shelter, leaving increased exposure. Moving injured cadets increased medical risk, but remaining on compromised ice could be catastrophic. This was his field, his decision. We relocate. Caleb nodded immediately. No argument, Jhavren asked. You agree? I don't know enough to disagree. That sentence stayed with him. They planned not far. A rock outcrop 200 meters uphill sat on stable ground. The shuttle's portable emergency shelter could be deployed there. Moving 12 cadets, one seriously injured instructor, one wounded cadet, supplies, heat packs, and communications gear through snow would be difficult. Bommel became essential. The unit cadet carried equipment no human could, then carried Jhavren. Jhavren objected. This is humiliating. Bommel adjusted him against his broad back. You weigh less than my childhood water pack. That did not improve it. Caleb walked beside them carrying medical supplies. Pexa led, not Caleb. Jhavren appreciated that more than he expected. Halfway to the rock outcrop, the snow beneath Caleb collapsed. One leg disappeared. He shouted. Bommel turned. Caleb dropped sideways, spreading his weight. Correct reaction by chance or experience, Jhavren did not know. The crust cracked. Bommel lunged. His enormous arm caught Caleb's jacket, pulled. The human slid free. A dark hole opened beneath. Water fast, cold. Caleb lay in the snow, breathing hard. Bommel stared down. You nearly entered the channel. Yep, you would have died, probably. Bommel looked at him. Caleb started laughing. Jhavren's crests rose in horror. Why are you laughing? Caleb sat up. Stress. That is not an acceptable stress response. Talk to evolution. His face had gone pale, hands shaking, not fearless, not invulnerable, scared. He stood anyway. Pexa pointed toward a safer route. Follow exactly. Caleb nodded. Yes, ma'am. They reached the rocks. The emergency shelter deployed. Bommel anchored it. Pexa chose the safest orientation. Kioran rechecked injuries. Caleb inventoried what they had carried and discovered one water pack had been left behind. He started to turn. Jhavren said no. Caleb stopped. We need it. We possess enough. But no, Jhavren's voice hardened. Risk exceeds need. Caleb looked toward the shuttle, then nodded. Okay. Jhavren noticed the human accepted expertise in both directions. He knew when to act. He also knew when to stop. 2 hours later, Jhavren asked him, is rapid acknowledgement of ignorance a human survival principle? Caleb looked over. What? When Pexa contradicted your understanding, you yielded immediately. She knew more. You did not attempt verification. I asked enough to know I was guessing. That is unusual. Caleb smiled faintly. Humans guess constantly. That is not reassuring. You're supposed to know when you're doing it. Jhavren's crest shifted. Caleb continued. Knowing when you don't know something is also survival training. Outside winds struck the emergency shelter. Jhavren listened. Humans had many unattractive qualities. Perhaps uncertainty was not always one of them. The rescue beacon transmitted successfully during a 30-second atmospheric clearing 3 hours later. Academy rescue craft arrived 47 minutes after that. The shuttle's ice shelf partially collapsed 2 hours after evacuation. Nobody aboard saw it happen. Jhavren saw the survey footage later. The rear half of the shuttle disappeared into black water. He watched twice, then turned off the recording. Beginner survival had saved them, not because beginners knew everything, because they knew enough to reach the moment when someone else knew more. Chapter 8. Beginners. The after-action review became politically uncomfortable. Jhavren enjoyed this. Academy administrators disliked the phrase actual emergency during survival instruction for obvious reasons. The shuttle manufacturer disliked propulsion control fault. The navigation contractor disliked position disagreement. The training office disliked glacial hazard misclassification. Everyone disliked liability. Jhavren disliked euphemisms. He sat before the Academy Review Board with his injured leg supported beneath the table. Kioran sat beside him. Pexa and Bommel waited behind. Caleb occupied the end seat. He looked uncomfortable. That was reasonable. An Academy dean addressed him. Cadet Winters, your performance indicates that level 1 placement was inappropriate. Caleb frowned. I don't know about that. Jhavren's crests rose. The dean continued. You demonstrated emergency medicine, exposure management, improvised shelter, resource allocation, group coordination, and communications conservation. Basic versions. The dean paused. Kioran smiled. Jhavren did too internally. The word had returned. Cadet, those competencies materially contributed to survival. Yes, sir. Therefore, we propose immediate transfer to advanced field survival. Jhavren said no. The room turned. The dean looked at him. Instructor, no. You disagree with the assessment? Yes. Based on what? Jhavren adjusted his leg. Cadet Winters performed almost nothing advanced. Caleb pointed slightly. Thank you. The dean stared. Jhavren continued. He did not repair the shuttle. No. He did not diagnose complex injuries. No. He did not navigate the local glacial terrain. No. He did not detect subsurface water. No. He did not predict the storm. No. Jhavren pointed toward Pexa. Cadet Luer did what he could not. Then Bommel. Cadet Atri did what he could not. Then Kjoren. Instructor Teth did what he could not. The dean frowned. Then what is your argument? Jhavren looked around the chamber. We have treated beginner knowledge as knowledge required only by beginners. Silence. That was the error. He indicated Pexa. Cadet Luer navigated terrain Winters could not read. Bommel. Cadet Atri detected danger Winters could not sense. Kjoren. Instructor Teth treated injuries Winters could not diagnose. Then Caleb, and Winters did what he could do. The dean frowned. Which was? Count people, check for fire, stop bleeding, retain heat, inventory water, preserve batteries, ask who knew more than he did. Jhavren leaned forward. The academy teaches those things first because they are simple. A pause. We confused simple with trivial. Kjoren's feathers lifted. A medic cannot save a patient who bleeds out before the medic arrives. Bommel added, an engineer cannot repair equipment if the user freezes while waiting. Pexa looked toward Caleb, and a navigator is of limited value if everyone ignores the navigator. Caleb smiled. See, teamwork. Pexa glared. Jhavren ignored both. Advanced expertise solves advanced problems. Fundamentals keep one problem from becoming 5 before the expert gets there. The curriculum review lasted 5 hours. The final proposal did not copy human childhood. Jhavren considered that wise. He had seen enough human childhood research to know several practices would terrify liability officers. Instead, the academy expanded foundational emergency training across every specialty. Pilots learned broader first aid. Engineers learned exposure management. Medical cadets learned degraded communications. Every cadet practiced navigation basics, casualty priorities, and how to identify when their knowledge ended. Not to replace experts, to stay alive long enough for experts to matter. After the review, Jhavren found Caleb outside. The human sat on a low wall. You prevented my promotion. You are welcome. Caleb laughed. Jhavren sat carefully beside him. What do humans call the educational philosophy you demonstrated? Caleb thought. Which part? Broad low-level emergency competence acquired before professional specialization. Caleb stared, being prepared. Jhavren waited. That is all, pretty much. That phrase is offensively imprecise. Caleb smiled. Yeah, Jhavren's crests twitched. We use it a lot. Epilogue, a bad time to learn. Jhavren visited Earth 11 months later. Official purpose, comparative emergency education research. Actual purpose, he wanted to determine whether humans were deliberately raising children as poorly supervised rescue workers. He expected specialized institutions. He found those. They were not the interesting part. At a public pool, 6-year-old humans learned to float. One child cried. The instructor kept a hand beneath her until she stopped fighting the water and started trusting it. Nobody called it drowning prevention. They called it swim class. At a secondary school, teenagers practiced chest compressions on training mannequins while making jokes bad enough that Jhavren briefly considered leaving the planet. Nobody called it field medicine. They called it health class. At a roadside service area, a parent showed a teenager how to change a damaged tire. The teenager complained continuously. The parent displayed the patience of a veteran negotiator. Nobody called it vehicle recovery training. They called it learning to drive. Jhavren watched a family check weather before entering mountain terrain, a coach clean a scraped knee, a child use a kitchen knife with an adult close enough to intervene, and a camping family drown a fire with more water than he thought necessary. He approved of the last one. Then came the elementary school. The alarm sounded. Children stood, formed lines, and walked outside to predetermined locations while teachers checked rooms and counted heads. The children were calm. Some were bored. One looked personally offended that emergency preparedness had interrupted art. Later, during a safety lesson, the teacher asked, if your clothes catch fire, what do we do? A room of small humans shouted, stop, drop, and roll. They demonstrated. One rolled into another. Both laughed. Jhavren stared until the teacher noticed him. I have a question, sure. How frequently do juvenile humans experience clothing ignition? The teacher blinked. Almost never. Then why teach the response? She gave him the same confused look Caleb Winters had given him months earlier. Because if it does happen, that's a really bad time to start explaining. Jhavren said nothing. That evening he opened his academy report and deleted 3 pages of analysis. He replaced them with 4 lines. Caleb Winters was correctly placed in beginner survival. Caleb Winters is by human standards a beginner. The Academy's error was assuming beginner meant unimportant. Recommendation, make every cadet pass level 1. He read it twice, then added, including the instructors. When Jhavren returned to Avarin, the curriculum committee argued for 9 hours. Beginner survival remained level 1. It simply stopped being optional. Caleb found him outside the training hall after the first expanded class. Did Earth make sense? Jhavren looked at the human. No, Caleb nodded. Good trip then. Jhavren's sensory crests twitched. I did learn what humans call this educational philosophy. Caleb waited, growing up. The human smiled. Yeah, that too. The galaxy called it survival training. Humans had been hiding parts of it inside childhood for centuries.